So how many of you have ever failed a test or a quiz? Well, so have I. And in fact, I've actually failed a lot of tests and quizzes in my school lifetime. But most of the tests and quizzes that I have failed have been before I learned how to study and before I developed the study tips that I have now, and also before I applied myself and before I cared, but also I didn't know how to study. So, yeah. So if you are like I was and you don't know how to study, or you don't care to study, or you're not motivated to study, I'm here to help you because today I'm going to be giving you some tips on how to study. And they are: read the material, understand the material, and don't overdo it. So it's always important to read the material that you're assigned before the test or the quiz. Teachers usually assign it for a reason, so we should read it. And back in my emo days, I didn't read anything. I didn't really care about anything. So I didn't apply myself, and I didn't read anything that I was assigned, and I think that also was a big reason that I did so awful in school, because I didn't apply myself or read anything, so not reading anything led to doing really awful. And at least when I started to read things, the material was at least somewhere in my brain, and I wasn't just guessing and not knowing what was going on. And also, teachers don't always mention everything in class that is in the reading, because they expect you to read it, and they sometimes want to test and see if you did read it or not. So we need to read it because it's fair for them to do that, because they expect us to read what they assign. And just because it's mentioned doesn't mean it won't be on the test or quiz. The second thing is you must understand what you're reading. There's no point in reading something if you're not going to understand it. It's just like reading a bunch of words that don't mean anything to you, and that's so unnecessary, and you won't get anything out of it. So it's a thing that I always do is I read a section or a paragraph or whatever, and then I recap it to myself. So I'll like re-say it in my own words, or I will restate it, or I'll just make sure that I understand it and that I can say it without saying the exact words, because it's a lot better to understand what you're reading than to just know the definition. Memorizing the definition, yes, will help you, but not as much as understanding, because when you understand it, you can apply it rather than just knowing what it says. The third thing that I think everyone should do when studying is to not overdo it when they're studying. Overdoing it is really unnecessary, and it overworks your brain to the point that it's tired and might even get more things wrong because it's so tired, because you worked it so hard. When I was in 9th grade, I think, Madison and I were studying for a science test, I think, and we studied from 10 o'clock at night to 1 in the morning for this science test, and we would drink black coffee to punish ourselves for not knowing the answers, I guess to motivate ourselves to know the answer or something. And it didn't help. It was kind of funny, but it was unnecessary. The amount of time that we studied was so unnecessary. And honestly, I do better now, or at least about the same, than I did when I studied for hours and hours on end, because I let my brain rest more. So I think it's important to set a time limit on ourselves when we study. I think that an hour at the most is enough. Unless, of course, it's a huge test, then study for longer. But if it's a quiz, I think we should study for like 30 to 45 minutes. If it's a test, like an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. I think it's important not to overwork our brains because it makes us do worse. So I hope that I was helpful to anyone that struggles with studying. I know I used to a lot, and I know that it's hard to find the motivation to study, but when you have like set things that you're going to do when you study, it's a lot easier than just going into it and not knowing what you're going to do. So I think it'll motivate you a little bit. So it's a lot easier if you will just read the material, understand the material, and not overdo it. I hope you all will put these tips to use the next time you study, and I hope you do well on your next quiz or test.